issues, but certainly if the Deputy would provide the information to me, we can certainly investigate.
Thank you, Mr. Noonan. Deputy Pringle.
Taoiseach, several deadly US Air Force Osprey aircraft crashes have taken place in recent years, one of which occurred in June 2022, when 5 US Marines were killed in an Osprey crash in Southern California. Following this, the Marine Corps published their investigation on the 21st of June 2023, which stated that the mishap was due to an unpreventable mechanical failure and not any error on the part of the pilot's crew or maintenance personnel. Despite the publication of this report, a US military flyover, including Osprey aircraft, flew over Dublin as part of the American football event in the Aviva Stadium on the 25th of August 2023. This was just 2 months after the publication of the crash report, and just 2 days before further 3 Marines were killed when their Osprey aircraft crashed during a training exercise off the northern coast of Australia. 3 months later, 8 airmen were killed in another crash in Japan. Following this, the military grounded all its Osprey aircraft until the beginning of this year. My question is, Taoiseach, did the Minister know about this report published by the US Marine Corps in June 2023 before Osprey aircraft were given permission to fly over Dublin in August of that year? If not, why not? And if so, why was this allowed before new safety recommendations were implemented?
I want to thank Deputy Pringle for raising the issue. I'm sorry I don't have information to hand on it, but I will ask the Minister to directly answer your question.
Deputy Jackie Cahill.
On the 1st of January this year, the limit for derogation was reduced from 250 kilograms per hectare to 220. Individual farmers are finding it very hard to calculate their exact position with banding and the allowance for feeding low protein feeds, etc. Individual farmers are finding it very hard to know what their exact stocking rate is. I would ask that the Department of Agriculture would send a statement to each farmer in derogation for each individual month from June on, so as farmers can know the exact position and that they won't exceed the limit, the new imposed limit.
Yeah, it's a very sensible suggestion from Deputy Cahill. I'll convey it to Minister McConalogue and ask him to reverse. And of course, the next big thing that we all need to unite and pull together on is making sure we maintain the derogation. And the first step in relation to Ireland's national effort in regards to that is the European elections Friday week, when we need to elect MEPs who understand the importance of it.
Deputy Chris Andrews.
Taoiseach, 3,800 homes are due to be built on the glass bottle site, yet only 350 of them will be social housing. How can this government justify the low level of social housing on this site and the unaffordable, so-called affordable homes on that site? Government need to buy more social housing and genuinely affordable homes instead of allowing 75% of them go to private ownership and almost certainly be taken up and bought by private vulture funds. Government needs to ensure that people who live and work locally are prioritised so they can continue to live and work in their community. When will contracts be signed, and will this government look at ensuring that the government and Dublin City Council purchase extra social and affordable homes on this site?
Thanks, Ian Corley. I want to thank Deputy Andrews for raising the issue in relation to the glass bottle site. Now, this is an issue Minister Ryan has raised also. I'll ask that the Minister for Housing comes back to you directly in relation to the point you make around the affordable housing and social housing on the site.
Deputy David Stanton.
Previously, up to 10,000 people in East Cork are under boiled water notice on and off for almost 8 years now, through no fault of their own. This could cost some families up to €500 per annum. Would the government consider some compensation for families towards the cost of this, because it's due to the fault of the state not providing adequate drinking water as it should? I'm told it will be at least another 22 months before it might be resolved. It's extraordinarily expensive in some families, and they must buy plastic bottles or boiled water and so forth. It's gone for about 8 years now. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Stanton, for raising the issue, and I can hear the frustration in your voice on behalf of your constituents in East Cork. I'll ask both East Éireann and the Minister for Housing to come back to you and I in relation to this matter.
Thank you very much, Deputy Paddy O'Sullivan.
Taoiseach, I'd like to raise the issue of sound barriers on motorways. Currently, obviously, there's major development around the Dunkettle interchange. That's most welcome, but with that development comes, I suppose, the increased use of traffic on the roads, and the likelier, I suppose, more likely it is for noise to emanate from that. Unfortunately, we're in a position at the moment where it's up to the TII to provide for sound maps periodically, and they do that process, but when they are found to be above the acceptable norms and decibel levels, there's actually no provision there for the TII to provide for noise barriers or any other mitigation measures that they may deem necessary. And they say it's actually the role of the County Council, and the County Council say that there's no actual fund for them to draw from to provide those mitigation measures. So I'm acutely aware of the timing coming up to the budget. I would ask that this would be given consideration and just get your opinion on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank Deputy O'Sullivan for raising this matter, and Minister Butler tells me that it was raised with her last week, I think, in the Shannon as well. So this is an issue the government will look at, because I'm conscious that regardless of where the responsibility lies, it's a real frustration for people. So in the run-up to the budget, let's see if we can address this. But I'll ask the Minister for Transport in the first instance for review.
Deputy Matt Carthy.
Taoiseach, I've raised before the atrocious conditions of local roads across rural communities, including in my own county of Monaghan. Local roads are in the worst state seen in decades because your government has underfunded councils. It now appears that rather than addressing the shortfall at a time that you're increasing fuel costs, we've been actually told by industry that the TII plan further unexpected cuts to road projects. It seems that government were hoping that this news of cuts would be kept under wraps until after the local elections. But I'll ask you today, Taoiseach, if you will let us know if you intend to provide councils with the additional funding they need to restore our local road network, or is it actually the case that you propose to reduce the number of road projects being completed this year?
We certainly intend to invest more in roads, more in the TII and more in the local authorities, including Cavan Monaghan, and I expect news very shortly.
Deputy Patrick Costello.
Count Corla. Taoiseach, I also wish to raise the issue of dual-use exports to Palestine. As has been said, since October 7th, we've had 32 million of dual-use export licences granted. And in granting a dual-use export licence, the Department of Trade is supposed to consider the human rights record and the respect for international law of the destination country. Now, surely since October 7th, everything we have seen would suggest that there is no respect for human rights and there is no respect for international law. Equally, everything we have seen in the brutal occupation of Palestine would say that there is no respect for human rights or international law by the Israeli government. So I don't understand how we're still granting licences to export 32 million worth of dual-use goods to the Israeli government. Furthermore, in the light of the recent ICJ ruling and the brutal assault on Rafah, surely we should be reviewing our dual-use licensing.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Yes, thanks to Deputy Costello for raising the matter. I think it falls within the remit of Minister Calleary in the department. So let me talk directly to the Minister and come back to you, Deputy Costello.
Deputy Josepha Madigan.
Thank you, Taoiseach. There is a commitment in the programme for government in relation to sanctions for contempt of court violations against social media companies. You'll recall, Taoiseach, back when the last time I was a backbencher, I brought forward a private member's bill in relation to contempt of court. It's really important that we prevent any conduct that abuses, prejudices or indeed obstructs the administration of justice. It's absolutely vital that we move this forward, that we fulfil our commitment in the programme for government. That is something that has been put on a statutory footing in the UK since 1981. It's been called on for many different occasions here, from the Law Reform Commission to the former Chief Justice Susan Denham. If we look back to the Jobstown trial many years ago, it's not something that we want to see again, and I would ask that it be expedited in the programme for government, hopefully through this administration. Thank you.
Minister.
Thanks to Deputy Madigan for raising this issue, which I know she's had a long-standing interest in. I'm very eager that any outstanding issues in the programme for government are advanced and progressed. I'm sure Minister McEntee is working on this, and I'll get an update from her for you.
Rose Conway-Walsh.
Minister, or Taoiseach, I'm glad the Minister for Social Protection is beside you and she might be able to answer this. She recently announced changes on job seekers related benefit, and I was contacted by a woman from Mayo that has worked 30 hours a week cleaning a school for 8 years. Every summer she's forced to sign on. She told me that she dreads the summer and how every year is a struggle, that she sometimes waits all summer for the payments to be sorted. Something has to be done for the many people like her that through no fault of their own will be left without pay during the summer. And I want to ask you, Minister, how will the changes to the job seekers related benefit affect the many workers in her situation and like her? Thank you.
Deputy, and I'm glad to announce that I've got approval from Cabinet for job seeker, or for the pay-related job seekers payment. I think that that's a step in the right direction, is to protect people so that they won't have a cliff edge drop in their income if they're unfortunate enough to lose their job. I'm starting this evening to bring the legislation through the Dáil. And I take your point on that, those particular people that are laid off during the summer months, and I will certainly outline those issues when I'm addressing the Dáil later.
Thank you, Minister. All right. Thank you. Deputy Willie O'Dea, please.
The Taoiseach will be aware that the Government will be seeking the advice of the Attorney-General on whether a constitutional referenda will be necessary if Ireland is to sign up to the WHO Pandemic Pact or Treaty, and also whether Ireland is to sign up to the EU Migration Pact. What I want to ask the Taoiseach is, has the Attorney-General offered any views on these matters yet? And secondly, would the Taoiseach agree with me that because these are changes of such fundamental importance, that whether or not a constitutional referendum is required, that the matter should still be, the opinion of the people should nevertheless still be canvassed? I mean, there is provision in the Constitution, Article 47 specifically, for referendums to take place on matters that don't involve an amendment to the Constitution.
Taoiseach.
Thanks to Deputy O'Dea. In relation to the WHO Pandemic Treaty, I'll just have to seek an update from the Minister for Health in relation to that. I'm not aware personally of any advices in regards to that. In relation to the EU Migration Pact, I am very confident of the ability of the Government and the House of the Oireachtas to opt in, and there being no legal requirement for a referendum. Certainly in relation to that, we're not proposing one, but we are proposing plenty of time in this House for people to debate through the provisions, tease through it. We obviously also provided extra time to the Justice Committee at their request to consider it also.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on promised legislation. We move now to a motion read proposed approval by Dáil Éireann of the People's Leave and Benefit Act 2019, extension of periods of leave order 2024. And I call on Minister Roderick O'Gorman to move the motion.
Move.
Is the motion agreed?
Agreed.
Motion is agreed. Just members, before moving then to the important statements on Ireland's recognition of the State of Palestine, I want to ask you to join with me in extending a very warm Céad Míle Fáilte to someone who is familiar to us all here, Dr. Gillan Abdallah-Majid, Ambassador of Palestine. You're very, very welcome. And as we proceed to take the debate, can I just say a word or two of caution, please? We will in this debate understandably want to express our horror at what I think has correctly been described by Deputy Holly Cairns as the depravity that we have seen over several months now taking place in Palestine, and indeed the events of the 7th of October in Israel. But I do need to make it very clear that when we speak here, we do clearly differentiate between Hamas and the Palestinian people, and we do clearly discriminate between the government of Israel and the Jewish and Israeli people. And we think, I think, particularly as we speak, about the very small but treasured Jewish community that we have in this country, that we value, that we treasure, and that we do not want to feel in any way undermined by our justifiable criticism of unthinkable acts of depravity that we have seen happening. I think we do need to bear all that in mind. So, that said, can I call on the Taoiseach? You're leading off, Taoiseach, are you, for us on this matter?
Ceann Corla, firstly, thank you for your own words of leadership in relation to this, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Last Wednesday, with the Taoiseach Minister Ryan, we announced that Ireland was recognising the State of Palestine alongside our partners in Spain and Norway. Today, the Government gave formal effect to that decision, and now Ireland has formally recognised the State of Palestine. Colleagues in Madrid and Oslo have also taken the same step. This decision fulfills our commitment in the programme recognition when we were convinced that it was the right thing to do. It was not unreasonable to ask, if not now, then when. Today is a historic day, but it takes place in the most sombre of circumstances as we witness a humanitarian catastrophe continuing to unfold in Gaza and in Rafah. We see children starving. We see children going to bed not knowing if they will wake up. And we see that new despicable trend where every now and again an event of particular horror takes place and the Israeli Prime Minister then apologises for the tragic mistake. As I've said, April's tragic mistake was the bombing of aid workers providing food to starving Gazans. May's tragic mistake was the bombing of displaced children, parents and families who had fled to a designated safe zone in truly apoplectic scenes. What will June's tragic mistake be? And more importantly, what are we all in this world going to do to stop it? As I've consistently said, there is an onus on every country and on the European Union to use every lever at our disposal to bring about a ceasefire. It is no longer enough just to condemn. It's no longer enough just to be repulsed. That's why I welcome the decision of the Belgian presidency to convene a meeting on the EU-Israel Association Agreement. The human rights clauses in that agreement are and must be meaningful, and when they're not being adhered to, that too must have consequences. We need to look at all the levers at our disposal to bring about a cessation of violence before Netanyahu's next tragic mistake. Formal recognition of the State of Palestine here today is an act of powerful political and symbolic value, and I hope it sends the Palestinian people a message of hope that in this their darkest hour, Ireland stands with them. It is an expression of our view that Palestine holds and should be able to vindicate the full rights of a state, including self-determination, self-governance, territorial integrity and security, as well as recognising Palestine's own obligations under international law. Generations of Palestinians have endured occupation, dehumanisation and humiliation. In today's West Bank, we see an extreme form of Zionism fuel settler violence and appropriation of land, illegal actions that largely go unchecked. In Gaza, since last October, we have seen tens of thousands die, many of them children, many more suffering life-changing injuries. We've seen schools, hospitals, cultural institutions, religious buildings reduced to rubble, vital civilian infrastructure destroyed, millions turned onto the road, dislocated from place to place in search of safety. The very least we can do is let them know their suffering is not going unnoticed and that it will be acted upon. Last week I said that recognition is a message to those in Palestine who advocate and work for a future of peace and democracy, that we fully respect your aspirations to be living freely in your own country, in control of your own affairs, under your own leadership. I said that moving in lockstep with our European colleagues, we sought to be bearers of hope. We wanted to reaffirm our belief that peace is possible, that justice is achievable, and that recognition of both states, Palestine and Israel, is the only cornerstone upon which that peace must be built. You cannot have a two-state solution without two states. We have long recognised the State of Israel and its right to exist in peace and security within internationally agreed borders. Today we say we equally recognise the State of Palestine and its right to exist within internationally agreed borders. When I spoke to President Abbas last Wednesday, he thanked Ireland, Spain and Norway for our leadership in recognising the State of Palestine, and he praised our decision as one of a beacon of hope to the Palestinian people. But our historic decision is not just about hope and symbolism, notwithstanding their importance. For me, recognition also serves three fundamental purposes. Firstly, it is our view that it is time Palestine takes its place among the free nations of the world, that it can pursue self-determination, self-governance, fulfil its obligation and avail of its rights under the UN Charter, and that it might have territorial integrity and sovereignty. Secondly, it expresses our belief that Israelis and Palestinians alike have an equal right to self-determination, safety, security and dignity, that no child, no matter their nation, is worth any less than another. Thirdly, it cements our fundamental conviction that the only just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian generation-long conflict is a two-state solution. Ireland, Spain and Norway are not alone in our recognition of Palestine. 3/4 of UN member states already do. The two-state solution is not a new idea. It has long been endorsed by the vast majority of nations, including through several UN Security Council resolutions. Palestine has long been seeking to take its rightful place among the free nations of the world and has already joined international organisations such as UNESCO and the International Criminal Court. The free countries of the world agree. 143 of them voted earlier this month in the General Assembly for full UN membership for Palestine. Ceann Comhairle, the ever-increasing number of illegal settlements and displacements of Palestinians have left the viability of the Palestinian state hanging by a thread. If countries do not now take this formal step to recognise Palestine, I fear there may not be the opportunity in the future. Now is the time to act. The 1967 borders have slowly been eaten away, and this cannot continue. Recognition says to young Palestinian people growing up in Gaza and the West Bank or in refugee camps around the region that there is a viable political path to achieve your dream of a Palestinian state, that there are people of goodwill in Ireland and elsewhere who will stand with you and work with you shoulder to shoulder to get there. We want to encourage and reward those who want to walk the political path, however difficult the journey. We on this island know how vital that support can be. The current government of Israel, the most right-wing in its history, has said that it will never accept a Palestinian state. The Israeli government have been strongly critical of our decision. It has wrongly sought to portray it as a reward for terrorism and a boost for Hamas. This could not be further from the truth. We have been clear, time and time again, that we utterly reject Hamas and all that it stands for. As I said last week, Hamas can bring nothing but pain and suffering to the people of Israel and the people of Palestine. I'm disappointed by how Israel has decided to conduct its interactions with ambassadors of Ireland, Norway and Spain following our decision. Mutual diplomatic respect is something that we should always aim to uphold. I want to, on the record of the Dáil, praise Ambassador Sonia McGuinness and her colleagues for their dignity and their professionalism with which they conducted themselves, and I want to thank her for the way in which she conducted herself in representing the views of Ireland and the Irish people. Lines of communication must be kept open if we're able to explain and understand decisions. That's why I welcomed the recent opportunity to speak directly to President Herzog. Pursuing a peace based on shared fundamental values as enshrined in the UN Charter, it is the ultimate way in which we defeat Hamas. It's how we defeat evil terrorist ideology and those who share that way of thinking. And let me be crystal clear once again. Ireland unreservedly condemns the despicable actions of Hamas on October 7th. We cannot begin to understand the immense pain and suffering of those held hostage and the families who desperately wish to see them returned to the arms of their loved ones. But recognising Palestine does no harm to Israel. We wish nothing for the people of Israel but security, peace and friendship. But that's what we wish for the people of Palestine too. We're obliged to speak up when we think others take the wrong path. We've long called for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, urgent and unhindered access to Gaza for humanitarian aid. On Friday, the International Court of Justice said that Israel must immediately halt its military offensive in the Rafah governorate, which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza's conditions of life that could bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part. The situation could not be more grave. The stakes could not be any higher. The ICJ's orders are legally binding. Israel must immediately comply. Ceann Comhairle, we're not naive. We know that recognition of Palestine alone will not resolve the conflict between Israel and Palestine, but it can make a real and meaningful contribution. We must be on the right side of history. It is a single step in a long and difficult path, a path Ireland is ready to walk with the people of Palestine, towards a future where there are two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security together. We want to see Israel and Palestine both take their rightful place on the world stage as equals. We want Israelis and Palestinians to know that there can be an end to this conflict, that peace is possible. We know that most Israeli people and Palestinian people want their children to be able to live in peace and security. And for all of this to happen, the fighting, the killing, the barbaric actions need to stop. So I want to conclude today by reiterating my statement from last week to the people of Palestine. In the West Bank, in Gaza, in refugee camps, in Ireland, those who join us in the Dáil today, around the world, We here in Ireland, we see you, we recognise you, we respect you, and today Ireland formally recognises the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Tánaiste.
Ceann Comhairle, bhadan dhéanann rialtas cinenne firimúil ahananta sa bhunna Stáit na Palestínig. Cinenne starúil agus táchtach é seo, agus is son chás na síochána a dhéanamar an cinenne. Is ceart agus is cóir é a dhéanamh. This morning, Ireland formally recognised the State of Palestine. It is an occasion of deep significance, not only to deputies in this House, but to the people of Ireland and to the people of Palestine. Much thought, analysis and diplomatic effort has informed the timing and context of this decision. Let me first emphasise that some considerations have never been in any doubt. Our commitment to international law and to the full implementation of a two-state solution, as outlined in multiple UN Security Council and UN General Assembly resolutions. Our desire to see the Palestinian people's right to self-determination vindicated. Our dream that this and future generations of Palestinian people will enjoy a peaceful and secure existence, living side by side in peace with their Israeli neighbours. Our commitment to supporting Palestinian state building and the development of Palestinian institutions throughout our development cooperation programme. The deep ties between the Irish and Palestinian people at every level and in every sector of our society. In this spirit, I know that recognising the State of Palestine has been heard by the Palestinian people as a clear expression of solidarity, and I want to join with colleagues in welcoming the Palestinian head of mission and soon-to-be full ambassador, Dr. Gillian Abdel Majid, to the House. I know that this is a special day for you, and I want to pay tribute to your work on behalf of the Palestinian people. Many Palestinians have told me that Ireland's decision has provided hope at what is a very dark time in Palestine, most obviously in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. It's my firm belief that in recognising the State of Palestine at this time, the government has also maximised the impact that this step can make to translate our hopes and aspirations into reality. Ceann Comhairle, I will return to the issue of recognition in more detail shortly. Before doing so, it's important to reflect upon the shocking reality in Palestine. Earlier this month, following weeks of warnings, the World Food Programme indicated that northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. Just over a week ago, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court applied for arrest warrants for leaders of Hamas, as well as for the Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli Defence Minister. Last Friday, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to, quote, immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict upon the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, unquote. The court characterised recent developments, in particular Israel's offensive in Rafah, as exceptionally grave. It ordered the immediate opening of the Rafah crossing for humanitarian aid and the facilitation of access by UN investigative bodies. And yet, we see the horror of the airstrikes on Rafah on Sunday, killing dozens of innocent civilians, babies and children, sheltering in a camp for displaced people. We see an entire population in Gaza, 90% of whom have been displaced at least once, and many multiple times, that is acutely food insecure, unable to access healthcare, education, or the most basic of social services. We see rockets continuing to be launched by Hamas towards Israel, indiscriminately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, emphasising again that organisation's utterly malign intentions and role. 7 months on from the savagery of the 7th of October, the unimaginable ordeal of Israeli hostages and their families continues. And I want to again restate my utter and unequivocal condemnation of what Hamas did that day. During my visit to the region in April, I saw firsthand the obstacles and restrictions facing aid entering into Gaza via Rafah. I also discussed humanitarian access in detail with my Egyptian and Jordanian counterparts. The challenges they outlined have been compounded further since then by the Israeli offensive in Rafah and indeed Hamas rocket attacks, which have disrupted the flow of aid at both the Kerem Shalom and Rafah crossing points. By repugnant attacks on aid trucks from Jordan as they drive through Israel without effective action by the Israeli police. By the continued lack of a proper deconfliction system inside Gaza. Universally, partners have urged Israel not to proceed with its offensive in Rafah and to ensure full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza. Israel has chosen to disregard these calls, but it cannot choose to disregard the orders from the International Court of Justice. These are legally binding. They must be complied with. We discussed all of this at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels yesterday, following an excellent and informative meeting between European Union and Arab foreign ministers. We agreed to convene an urgent meeting of the EU-Israel Association Council in the context of our grave concerns in respect of Israel's adherence to the human rights clauses in the Association Agreement, and particularly in the context of the ICJ provisional orders. It is no secret that Ireland has been pushing the European Union to act more decisively and at an earlier stage, and we will continue to do so. But I am encouraged that we are now beginning to see a clear view emerging amongst Member States that it is simply not credible that the EU-Israel Association Agreement can remain entirely unaffected by the behaviour of this Israeli government. Ceann, as this House is aware, the government has had a long-standing commitment to recognise the State of Palestine. We committed to doing so as part of a lasting settlement of the conflict, or in advance of that, if doing so would progress efforts to reach a two-state solution or protect the integrity of Palestinian territory. The government set out its reasoning for doing so at this moment in time when we announced this step alongside Norway and Spain last week. I believe it is also important that these reasons are also put on the record of this House. Our recognition of the State of Palestine has three fundamental purposes. First, it makes clear our view that it is time Palestine takes its full place amongst the nations of the world, that its right to self-determination, self-governance and territorial integrity and sovereignty must now be vindicated. As the UN General Assembly agreed earlier this month, Palestine is ready to take on all the rights and obligations of a state under the UN Charter. Second, it is an expression of our belief in the equal right to self-determination, peace, security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. The aspirations of both peoples must be afforded equal legitimacy based on a two-state solution that delivers a just and sustainable peace. Third, it is a reiteration of our fundamental conviction that the only just and sustainable peaceful solution for both Palestinians and Israelis is the implementation of that two-state solution, ending the Israeli occupation of Palestine and resulting in a viable, contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, based on the 1967 borders. The policies and actions of successive Israeli governments, in particular the current government, have seriously undermined the prospects of a two-state solution and the viability of a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Netanyahu has publicly rejected even the concept of a Palestinian state. The urgency of protecting the integrity of Palestinian territory has reached a point that our efforts to do so through the legal and policy avenues we have used to date were no longer sufficient. In particular, this is the result of the sustained Israeli assault on Gaza, specifically on the civilian population and civilian infrastructure, as well as the denial of sufficient humanitarian aid over a sustained period of time. There has also been a significant increase of violence, displacement and annexation in the West Bank. In parallel, there have been renewed international efforts, in particular by Arab partners, to develop a clear pathway to implement a two-state solution. Not to talk about it, not to repeat our commitment to it, to implement it. I and my officials have spent the last few months in constant contact with partners in the region, particularly Egypt and Jordan, as they have developed an Arab peace vision. This document prioritises concrete steps to end the brutal war in Gaza and to take concrete, irreversible steps to build a Palestinian state. The Arab peace vision recognises that any final settlement will, of course, need direct negotiations between the parties. We all agree on that. But importantly, it starts from the premise that no one, not this Israeli government, not any government, can have a veto on the building of a Palestinian state. Israel does not get a veto on whether Palestine exists or not. I've spent the last few days in Brussels undertaking intensive discussions with partners. On Sunday, I attended a meeting convened by Norway and Saudi Arabia, bringing together over 40 partners from across Europe, the Middle East and elsewhere, with a focus on tangible steps towards implementing the two-state solution. Arab partners set out the core principles underlying the Arab peace vision. The new Palestinian Prime Minister spoke about the dire resourcing situation that the Palestinian Authority is facing and the need for early and comprehensive support for their service delivery and reform efforts. 6 of the Arab foreign ministers then attended the Foreign Affairs Council yesterday and presented their thinking in more detail. The European Union unanimously agreed to work with the Arab Contact Group on their peace vision, to add our ideas about how it can be implemented, and suggest practical steps that European countries can take to be part of that process. It is notable that the very first ask that the Arab peace vision has of European states, the top priority for Arab partners, is that all European countries recognise Palestine. As many of you know, this is the political framework within which Ireland, along with Spain, Norway and others, have been discussing the issue of recognition over the last few months. It has long been my view that recognising Palestine would be most impactful if done in a coordinated manner with other partners. That we've taken the decision to recognise the state of Palestine together with Norway and Spain, and in the wider context of a regional peace initiative, is important. I am confident that there is a growing consensus among like-minded partners that Palestinian statehood can no longer wait until the end of a process of final settlement negotiations between the parties. I anticipate that other European partners may decide to recognise Palestine in the coming weeks and months. As Ceann, the challenge now is to maintain this momentum. We need a fundamental paradigm shift in the way all of us in the international community view the solution to this conflict. We need urgency and we need concrete steps. We have said many times that an immediate ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages and full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access are essential. They remain essential and we will not rest until those are achieved. Simultaneously, it is urgent that we support the Palestinian Authority. I spoke in some detail to the new Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa in Brussels on Sunday night. He highlighted a number of immediate priorities which I brought to the Foreign Affairs Council yesterday. I asked that the European Union increase pressure on Israel to release the tax revenues it is withholding from the Palestinian Authority, but also that the European Union Commission release pending funds immediately, as well as putting in place an ambitious and comprehensive package of support for 2024 and beyond. I asked the EU High Representative to invite Prime Minister Mustafa to present his reform programme in detail to the June Foreign Affairs Council. I was impressed with Prime Minister Mustafa and his team, some of his ministers whom I met, and it's unforgivable, it's unconscionable that Israel would withhold Palestinian revenues from this technocratic government, which is impairing its capacity to hit the ground running to try and deliver services to both the people of the West Bank and to Gaza. Our own bilateral development cooperation programme with Palestine will of course continue and intensify alongside our humanitarian support for the immediate basic needs for the population in Gaza. We also need to move quickly to get the former EU border assistance mission at the Rafah crossing operational again. The European Union can play a constructive role in maintaining the vital lifeline for goods and people between Egypt and Gaza open. With Spain and Norway and Arab partners, we will also continue to build momentum behind the Arab peace vision. We will encourage others to recognise the State of Palestine, and we will work to build support for a comprehensive effort to bring an end to this conflict. We will continue to push in New York for full UN membership for Palestine, and we will continue to hold this Israeli government accountable. We've already committed to intervene in the South Africa versus Israel case under the Genocide Convention at the International Court of Justice. As we work on our intervention, our most immediate focus will be ensuring compliance by Israel with the provisional orders issued last week. Getting agreement at EU level to convene a meeting of the EU-Israel Association Agreement in this context is an important step in doing so. We will step up our support for the vital work of the International Criminal Court, even as the prosecutor and his staff are threatened with sanctions. We must robustly uphold the independence of these international legal courts and fora. Let me briefly address, Alaska and Cora, the Israeli reaction to the decision taken by Ireland, Spain and Norway. In our private engagement with Israel, as well as in our public communication, we have been clear in setting out the thinking and motivation behind our decision to recognise Palestine. We support the right of the State of Palestine to exist and the right of the Palestinian people to peaceful self-determination, just as we, without question, support the right of the State of Israel to exist and the right of the Israeli people to peaceful self-determination. We understand that this Israeli government disagrees with our decision. That is their right, as it is their right to inform us of their view, forthrightly and robustly, through diplomatic channels. We have no problem with that. However, the time and manner in which this was done was unacceptable. I have made clear that the treatment of our ambassador in Tel Aviv and her Spanish and Norwegian counterparts fell far short of what we would expect from any country, irrespective of our political differences. And I want to pay tribute to Ambassador Sonia McGuinness for her resilience and her outstanding performance as our ambassador in Israel during a very, very challenging time. I have, for my part, and will continue to treat Israel's ambassador to Ireland with courtesy and with respect. I expect the same in return. We wish to maintain functional diplomatic engagement and dialogue with Israel. Diplomacy comes into its own at times of intense disagreement between states. Imposing limitations on the Ireland-Israel diplomatic relationship would make no sense, and we do not intend to do so. In my view, it would be a self-defeating mistake for the Israeli government to decide to do so. I also want to emphasise in the House today what I stated clearly last week. Israeli and Palestinian citizens alike are a valued and cherished part of our society here in Ireland. And I challenge and reject anyone who would seek to delegitimise either's history, culture or beliefs. I also unambiguously reject those in Palestine, in Israel and around the world who call for the entirety of the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan to be a mono-ethnic state based either on forcible exile or subjugation. These are messages that I wish to convey clearly to the Israeli and Jewish communities here in Ireland, and I will be doing so personally in the very near future. Alaska and Cola, there is much work ahead through both multilateral and bilateral engagement, through continued advocacy and diplomacy, through building and reinforcing our friendship with the Israeli and Palestinian people alike. This Irish Government's commitment will remain unwavering, grounded in the resolute belief that we can together realise the aim that is overwhelmingly endorsed by the international community, a two-state solution based on 1967 borders with the State of Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, sovereign and viable state of Palestine living side by side in peace and security and mutual recognition, with Jerusalem serving as the future capital of both states. This may sound like an impossible aspiration, but there is no other just and sustainable option. We refuse to accept that the only future for Palestinians is one of dispossession and occupation and displacement and brutality. We refuse to believe that the only future for the Israeli and Palestinian people is a future of hatred, conflict and death. We cannot accept that, and we will not accept that.
Thank you very much, Las Concorla. I was very proud that the Green Party argued passionately for the recognition of Palestine in the programme for government we agreed with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael back in 2020. Events have moved on since then, tragically so, but the case for recognising Palestine was as strong back then as it is now. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when and to what effect. And today we deliver on that commitment as a government and as a parliament, and the timing, in my belief, is important and right. Firstly, because we do not do so alone, not just Spanish and Norwegian colleagues, but it also comes after that vote in the United Nations on the 10th of May last, when 143 countries voted in favour of Palestine being recognised within the United Nations system. And secondly, as the Taoiseach has just said, the timing is important here because that Arab peace plan presented at the European Council yesterday has central to it the issue of recognition and the benefit and the momentum it can bring to deliver a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. And thirdly, the need for that ceasefire. The fact that we cannot stay silent, either on the release of hostages or what we saw the day before yesterday, the bombing of a refugee camp in Rafah, which is similar to what had happened right through the last 7 months. And critically as well, our timing of this recognition comes on the back of an application from the International Criminal Court for a warrant against the Israeli Prime Minister for the actions that are taking place, and the International Court of Justice called similar to ourselves for an immediate end to the assault on Gaza. So today we recognise the state of Palestine, and I believe it has a particular resonance for Irish people, given the echoes it brings from our own history. It's the right and proper thing to do. I know the concept of nationhood can be a fraught one. Populations can move and intersperse with others, borders can shift back and forth with time, and ethnicity is as inexact a concept as it is a motive. But there can be little doubt that the Palestinian people have an undeniable argument for nationhood. Denying or hindering such an obvious claim is as morally wrong as it is unwise. It stores up grievances that future generations will ultimately have to deal with. Some of the responses from the ordinary Palestinian people we've heard from since we announced our intention have been very moving. The need to secure a ceasefire and get humanitarian into Gaza remains without doubt the most pressing challenge facing the people of Palestine, but it has been heartening to hear that the decision of Ireland, Spain and Norway has offered some solace to those who may have despaired that the international community have forgotten their plight. It's not merely to offer a sense of solidarity that we take this step. We recognise Palestine today because we recognise that peace cannot be achieved without doing so. Joseph Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, put it well last November when he said that our political myopia has led us to think that the conflict was manageable by paying lip service to the two-state solution and then leaving it to fester. He was right. The West averted its gaze and was content to let the situation fester as long as the uneasy peace continued and didn't intrude upon our lives. We have learned the hard way that this tactic was not just morally wrong, but strategically foolish. And we are unequivocal. Nothing can justify the barbaric slaughter Hamas carried out on the 7th of October, but neither can any of us stand here and say that we never suspected that the powder keg that was Gaza would not explode with such devastating consequences. And we know that Ireland's recognition may present challenge for Jewish people in Israel and across the world, and I ask our Jewish friends with real respect that you look to our experience here on this island, where the long-term denial of one community's rights in favour of another's led to similar misery and devastation. Such an injustice can be maintained for decades, maybe even longer, but a people's right to exist cannot be suppressed forever. Let me also reiterate to Israel, the Irish people recognise your rights to exist as a nation. Recognising Palestine does not in any way diminish your rights as a state. In fact, it is the opposite. Our dearest wish is that the establishment of a Palestinian state solidifies your existence and allows you to prosper and flourish in peace and harmony with your neighbours. I particularly want to offer reassurance to Jewish friends living here in Ireland. The last 7 months have not been easy, and many maybe feel that there's a change in attitude towards them or people of their religion. We need to assure them they are welcome here, they belong here, they are as Irish as all of us. They're respected and a part of important our state, our citizenship. And long may Ireland be a home to Jewish people so they can continue their outstanding contribution to our nation in art, in science, in business and in politics. This House has benefited so much from people from our Jewish community. I share their frustration at the one-sided approach that some people take to the conflict. There are some who appear to think that Israel's government's appalling actions mean they can be silent on Hamas's atrocities. I do not. This is not a matter of taking sides. The atrocities were committed towards innocent Israelis on the 7th of October were vile, as is the slaughter that the Israeli Defence Forces have unleashed upon innocent Palestinians after it. Both are wrong, and we are vociferous in condemning both. I said this outside government buildings when we made our announcement last Wednesday, that we had learned the hard way in Ireland that using violence against innocent civilians to try and achieve political goals can and must never win. Whether that's a car bomb on the streets of Omagh or Jerusalem, be it a rocket landing in Tel Aviv or a no-warning bomb blast in Birmingham, be that the assault on a kibbutz or a bomb dropped from a jet fighter onto a refugee camp in Gaza, it is all wrong. There is no hierarchy in death. I would like to conclude by responding to criticism that has been levelled at us by the Israeli government that by recognising Palestine, that we are somehow emboldening the terrorists of Hamas, and that this decision will only lead us further down the path of violence. Again, I think valuable lessons can be taken from the Irish experience. There was a time, after all, when similar warnings were made by the British establishment, a long time ago now, that the Irish were not fit to govern themselves and that anarchy would surely follow if we were given the chance. The path to Irish statehood wasn't smooth, but over a century on from those dire warnings, the nation that we represent in this chamber, I think, stands up for the rights of the United Nations, the rights of individual nations, stands up to try and help build peace in our very troubled, conflict-ridden world. If allowed to, and with the support from around the world, I pray that Palestine could in time follow a similar path to our own. There will no doubt be missteps just as we have made, and setbacks undoubtedly, but the only path forward involves recognising that Palestine too has an unalienable right to take its place in the international community. When the people of Palestine ask for us is not outrageous or extravagant, if anything it is modest. As the Palestinian-American academic Edward Said said, it is no more than any of us would ask for ourselves. The long-run goal, he wrote, is the same for every human being, that politically he or she may be allowed to live free from fear, insecurity, terror and oppression, free also from the possibility of exercising unequal or unjust domination over others. Today we recognise Palestine as a state. We commit to working with our European colleagues here in government, across the aisles, I'm sure, in this House, to do everything we can to support an immediate cessation of the assault in Gaza, and that the day after that ceasefire, we help deliver a two-state solution, which is the only path to peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Moving Sinn Féin, ich habe Mary Lou MacDonald.
Good morning, Las Corla. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians teach life after they have occupied the last sky. We teach life after they have built their settlements and apartheid walls. After the last skies, we Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir. These are the words of Palestinian poet Rafif Ziadah. Words that powerfully captured the cry of Palestine to the world, a cry that has reverberated for generations. See us, hear us, stand with us, vindicate our nation and our people, recognise us. Today, the Irish Government at last responds to that cry for justice and becomes one of the first Western European countries to recognise the state of Palestine. The people of Ireland have always stood with the Palestinian people in their struggle for freedom, self-determination, human dignity and peace. Conscious of our own history of colonisation, of oppression, dispossession, famine and partition. A history that has ingrained in the collective consciousness the impetus to confront injustice and inequality and human rights abuse across the world. So today we say again to the Palestinian people, you are not alone. Ireland recognises you, your people and your right to nationhood. We stand on the side of justice, of freedom, on the side of a just and durable, lasting peace. Ireland's recognition of the Palestinian state comes as the people of Gaza endure the darkest of moments, as they continue to endure horror on an unimaginable scale. As world leaders continue to draw a false equivalence between the impoverished occupied and the oppressive occupier. By recognising the state of Palestine, we recognise the right of Palestinians to their homeland, the right of Palestinians to a future free of oppression and war. We recognise the human rights of the Palestinian people to exist as equals in this world. Today's announcement has been a long time coming, too long. 10 years ago, the Dáil voted unanimously in favour of a Sinn Féin motion to recognise the state of Palestine. A decade ago, we had cross-party support for this. It shouldn't have taken us this long to get here. But of course, it is never too late to do the right thing, and this is the right and the just thing. I want to welcome and to acknowledge the incredible work of the current Palestinian ambassador and of all her predecessors. Las Ceann, long before I was ever elected to the Dáil, I stood with so many others outside the gates of Leinster House, calling on, imploring the government and the European Union to deliver justice for Palestine and its people. Activists have been constant in their commitment to Palestine, relentlessly pushing, standing their ground, standing up for what is right, never giving up, slowly and surely changing the conversation. So I want to pay special tribute to activists the length and breadth of this country and beyond, who for decades have marched, protested and rallied in solidarity with Palestine, and whose steadfast effort has brought us to this day. The Palestinian struggle has gone on for generations. The catastrophe of Nakba was only the start. 76 years, the story of Palestine has been one of colonisation, occupation, apartheid, violent, brutal human rights atrocities at the hands of the Israeli state and its ferocious military. Daily oppression that saw Palestinians killed, jailed, tortured and forced from their lands. Homes, schools, health facilities bulldozed to the ground as illegal settlers violently overtake Palestinian lands and villages in direct violation of international law. Palestine is a nation threatened by annihilation. The world was always going to face a moment of reckoning on Palestine, and Las Ceann, as Israel continues its brutal onslaught on the refugee population of Gaza and launches horrific missile attacks on Rafah, I believe the moment of reckoning is now. Rafah is the place where hundreds of thousands of Gazans were forcefully displaced in the wakes of Israel's initial bombardment. There is nowhere left for them to flee, nowhere left to go. They are trapped. And on Sunday, as Israel bombed a refugee tent camp and took countless lives, they described it as a tragic mistake. Today, we have reported that 7 more lives have been taken in Israeli airstrikes in Rafah, and there will be more slaughter unless Israel is confronted by the world. The life of a Palestinian child is worth the same as a child anywhere else in the world. But we ask, where is the protection of international law for every child killed in Gaza, for every child who will be killed in Rafah? We've all seen the images of heartbroken Palestinian mothers inconsolably weeping over their dead children. Their entire world collapsed forever into tiny white sheets. Fathers desperately digging their children out of rubble, knowing that they have breathed their last. Little boys and little girls horrifically injured, covered in debris, being rushed to hospitals that are overwhelmed with the maimed and the dying. This is a criminal war on the young. Half of Gaza's population is under the age of 18. If you're a child of the age of 11 in Gaza, you've already endured 4 Israeli military bombardments. For 8 months, Netanyahu has conducted a war on children, and the world has looked the other way. This annihilation is the cruel crescendo of 76 years of occupation and apartheid. Since October, almost 36,000 Palestinians have been killed, 15,000 children. So this is not a moment of an intense disagreement between states. Rather, this is a moment of catastrophe, of savagery, of an Israel that has brazenly, repeatedly broken every international law, has acted with impunity, and as of yet has not been held to account. And for this to stop, the international community has to act. The European Union, Britain, the United States of America must remove political support, end preferential treatment for Israel as it perpetrates crimes against the Palestinians with impunity. They must stop funding and arming the Israeli military machine as it commits genocide in Palestine. The ordinary people of Europe, I believe, don't want a European Commission that shamefully endorses Israel's action. And I'm conscious we'll have a new European Parliament and a new Commission. And I do not believe that a European Commission or a President of the Commission can condone the actions of Israel. Rather, they must confront them. And Ireland must insist, all of us, insist on that point. Today, along with Spain and Norway, we take a lead. But recognition of the Palestinian state can't be the end. It has to be just a beginning, a new departure in pursuing freedom and justice for the Palestinians. The Irish government must now follow recognition by enacting the Occupied Territories Bill, and we have Senator Francis Black joining us here, and the Israeli illegal settlement divestment bill brought forward by my colleague Deputy Brady. We also have to take the lead in the European Union, pushing for sanctions against Israel, holding Israel to account by joining the ICJ genocide case. Israel, for now, turns its face not alone against peace, but against the rule of international law. And therefore, a movement against apartheid in Palestine with the same momentum and the same drive as the movement against South African apartheid is, I believe, essential. I believe it's vital to secure the enforcement of international law. We need, of course, an immediate ceasefire. We need the return of all hostages, the renewal of a peace process grounded in international law. This is the only way the children of Palestine and Israel can have the future of peace they deserve. Young people in particular have stepped forward, standing for the cause of Palestinian freedom. They've marched in cities and towns throughout Ireland and the world, calling for an end to the slaughter and an immediate ceasefire. On college campuses throughout the world, they've stood together against Israeli war crimes. And world leaders must now listen to the voices of the young, because this generation is right. Our recognition of the Palestinian state is an important moment, but the real power of today will only be defined by what happens next. This must be Ireland's first step in pushing for an end to Israeli occupation, apartheid, an end to their human rights violations. Because Palestinians wake up every day not knowing if it will be their last. Palestinians wake up every day to teach the rest of the world life. They cry out for freedom, for justice, for human dignity. They cry out for life, and Ireland and the world must see that they have it.
Alaskan Corla, I welcome the Palestinian ambassador, members of the Palestinian community and long-standing campaigners for justice in Palestine here to the Dáil today for these statements that mark an historic moment for both Ireland and Palestine. The decision to officially recognise the state of Palestine fulfils a Dáil mandate that is now almost a decade old. It was in December 2014 that the members of this House adopted the Sinn Féin motion that called on the then government to take this step. Better later than never, of course. When the then Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams proposed that motion, it was in the aftermath of the 2014 bombardment of Gaza that had resulted in the killing of 2,251 Palestinians, including more than 500 children. Better later than never. What we have had since is yet another lost decade when the world turned a blind eye to the ongoing relentless violation of international laws perpetrated against the people of Palestine by Israel. During the 2014 bombardment, the world had watched as 4 little boys playing football on a beach in Gaza were deliberately targeted and bombed by the IDF. The world did nothing. Irish governments, often saying the right thing, did nothing. It was the same in 2015 when Amnesty International documented 20 cases of unlawful killings of Palestinians. And in October that year, when 17-year-old Dania Jihad Hussein Irsed, with her arms raised, pleading for mercy, was shot at least 6 times by Israeli forces in Hebron. Strong words, sometimes no action ever. In 2016, when the world watched settlement expansion in the West Bank and when the impact of the brutal blockade in Gaza was reported by human rights organisations, the world stayed mute. A new Irish government failed to enact the Dáil decision to recognise the state of Palestine. It's not the right time, we were told. Better later than never. In 2017, when 4 Palestinian human rights groups submitted a report to the International Criminal Court outlining that high-level Israeli officials were complicit in committing war crimes against the people of Palestine, again, world leaders stayed silent. They described Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East. Some, including Irish ministers, called for restraint in settlement expansion. But as the occupation continued and the blockade intensified, Israel faced not a single consequence. In their attempt to draw international attention to the impact of the blockade, throughout 2018 and 2019, Palestinians in Gaza engaged in what they called the Great March of Return. They were doing what we, across the Western world, had told them was the effective way to highlight their cause. They were engaged in peaceful, non-violent protest. Israel responded by murdering 223 of them, including little 11-year-old Yasser Abu Najah from Khan Yunis, who was shot dead as he hid with 2 friends behind a bin. His crime was chanting a Palestinian slogan at the cowards who described themselves as the most moral army in the world. And it still wasn't the right time to recognise that Yasser's state existed. In 2020, when Israel was continuing to benefit from the most preferential trading, economic and diplomatic relationships with the Western world, international leaders ignored the appeals of UN human rights experts when they called for an independent investigation into the killing of 15-year-old Ali Abman Abu Alia, who had become the 6th Palestinian child to be killed by Israel that year. And on and on and on it went. The Gaza bombardment of 2021 that left 254 dead, including 67 children. The regular brutal attacks on refugee camps, including the 2022 attack on Jenin camp and the accompanying targeted sniper assassination of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by an IDF sniper. Throughout the decade since this House has called for the recognition of Palestine, there have been two constants: Israel's disregard for international law and the lives of Palestinians, and the refusal of world leaders to hold them accountable for their war crimes. Alaskan Corla, I am immensely proud that this day has come. I'm proud not of any politician, I'm proud of the people in the gallery who forced it to happen. I'm proud of the hundreds of thousands of Irish people who marched, who campaigned, who have refused to allow us to turn the other way. I'm proud of those Palestinians who have shared their story with the people of Ireland. We, in turn, have taken them to our hearts. I regret the last lost decade, when Ireland said the right things but failed to do the things that needed to be done. Better later than never. Because it was as a result of world inaction that brought us to where we are. The horrendous attacks of Hamas against innocent Israelis on October the 7th have rightfully been condemned over and over and over again. But history did not start on October the 7th, 2023, and the war crimes of that day provide no justification for the war crimes committed by Israel every day since. As we today declare that Ireland recognises the state of Palestine, we do so against a backdrop of over 36,000 Palestinians having been killed by Israel in Gaza, including more than 15,000 children in just 7 months. So let us declare as well today that there will be no more lost decades, lost years, lost opportunities. Israel has been conducting a genocide because history tells it can do so with impunity. Some states like Ireland saying the right thing but not doing the necessary things. Other powerful states being complicit in every illegal action conducted under the Israeli flag. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has now sought arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu. The International Court of Justice now considers a charge of genocide and has ordered Israel to cease the attacks on Rafah. Ireland, Norway and Spain officially recognise the state of Palestine. All better later than never. But today is not an end, it's just a beginning. A beginning of an international chorus that demands an end to the savagery of Israel against the women, men and children of Palestine. That demands an end to the occupation, the apartheid, the oppression, the bombings. If we say that Palestine has a right to a state, then we must take action against those who are determined to destroy that objective. If we say that international law matters, then we cannot trade with a state that breaches it every single day. If we say that the lives of Palestinian children have worth, then we cannot engage in diplomatic niceties with the state that is murdering them. We know that action is better taken later rather than never. But we also know at some stage there will be no later. This is the last chance. If there is to be a free, sovereign Palestine, then we must act now. No more wasted decades, no more lost opportunities, no more excuses. Now is the right time. Stop the preferential treatment for Israel. Stop arming Israel. Stop the economic supports for Israel. Stop the war. Stop the genocide. Because, unfortunately, Lascan Corla, it is too late for far too many Palestinians, but it's better later than never. Today is a historic day, but it's just a beginning.
Thanks, Lascan Corla. I'd just like to welcome the Palestinian ambassador here today with us, because today is an important day for Ireland in recognising the state of Palestine. It is the right thing to do. Ireland's formal recognition of the State of Palestine firmly reflects support and solidarity for Palestine by the people of Ireland. And I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of members of Irish Sport for Palestine in the gallery and all the work that they do. Ireland, along with Spain and Norway, have stood up against the shameful inaction from the EU. For years, we have witnessed the inaction and silence from the EU towards apartheid Israel. Increased EU trade deals with Israel, while Israel unleashed a brutal system of apartheid on the people of Palestine. 10 years after the Dáil voted in favour of a Sinn Féin motion calling for Ireland to officially recognise the State of Palestine, it is shameful that it has taken the murder of 36,000 Palestinians in the current phase of slaughter by Israel before we recognise Palestinian statehood. Today is welcome and important. It's really important that politics is seen to work. If politics doesn't work, militarism flourishes. We need to show Palestine that politics works, because to date, politics has failed Palestinians. We must ensure that the government's solidarity to the State of Palestine does not stall for another 10 years while thousands more die at the hands of the Israelis. We must see meaningful actions taken to sanction apartheid Israel. We need to enact Francis Black's Occupied Territories Bill and the Sinn Féin Illegal Israeli Settlements Divestment Bill 2023. Both these bills will have the potential to have immense impact on apartheid Israel. It is vital that we see these two bills enacted as a matter of urgency. And while today is a historic day, our eye must be on Rafah right now. We must ensure that we do all we can to halt the genocide being inflicted on those seeking shelter and safety in Rafah.
And I also want to welcome the Ambassador and also to the campaigners in the gallery and also the ones outside Leinster House today. I'm proud to be able to speak on this historic day as Ireland finally recognises the State of Palestine. It's been 10 years since the Dáil unanimously supported the Sinn Féin motion calling for Ireland to recognise Palestine. It should not have taken 10 years, but it did. Now, for not the first time, the Irish people are ahead of the Irish government. The Irish people have always recognised Palestine. For decades, people of Ireland have wholeheartedly stood side by side with the Palestinian people in their struggle for freedom and justice, a struggle that we Irish know only too well. Both Ireland and Palestine have a shared history of struggle against partition and oppression. So today, Leinster House joins thousands, I should say, of ordinary houses right across Ireland who have always flown the Palestinian flag for decades. But when recognition is historic, it must not be the end. Words without sanctions are absolutely futile. The Irish government must now take the steps in supporting the Palestinian people to secure a viable and free Palestine. We must sanction Israel for their ongoing gross violations of international law. Ireland must enact the Israeli Settlement Divestment Bill. It must enact the Occupied Territories Bill. It must join the ICJ case against Israel, and it must increase funding to UNRWA. Israel must be held to account. Israel must face sanctions. No more excuses. Ireland must use our position to persuade and pressurise the European government or the European Union to act. The EU has failed to take any meaningful action against Israel. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has provided cover for Israeli war crimes. What we are witnessing right now in Gaza is ethnic cleansing. This is a war crime. This is genocide. This week, the Palestinian people who moved to a so-called safe zone in Rafah were bombed out of existence. Children were burnt alive as they slept. It is beyond words. The people of Gaza have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Imagine the torture of knowing that each moment could be our last as the bombs rain down. And if they survive the bombs, they wait to face starvation and famine. This famine is man-made. The Israel blockade must be lifted right now. A ceasefire must happen right now. And America must stop supplying Israel with the arms.
At the outset, I'd like to congratulate the government on taking this decision. It is of some historic significance, and I know the government will have come under pressure not to do so. Ireland once sought international recognition, and so we are proud today to stand with Palestine and to help them take their place amongst the nations of the world. I would like to commend the Taoiseach in particular for the manner in which he has represented the views of the Irish people in recent months. We don't have to agree on every point to appreciate the sincerity with which he has approached this issue. However, the recognition of the State of Palestine is not enough. It will not save lives in itself. I found it particularly poignant to hear the voice of a little Palestinian child in the gallery earlier. The Palestinian people need an immediate and permanent ceasefire. The hostages must be released. The man-made famine and medical disaster for injured civilians can be stemmed if Israel stops blocking humanitarian aid into Gaza. The EU can and must act by suspending the trade agreement with Israel. The EU is Israel's largest trading partner, with 32% of Israel's imports coming from the EU. And the Irish government can send a further message of solidarity by passing the Occupied Territories Bill to ban any goods and services produced in Israeli-occupied settlements in the West Bank. However, the reality is that there is one man with unparalleled influence to bring the disaster in Gaza to an end. His name is Joe Biden, and he has to do better. We know things about peace processes in this country. We know that if there is to be peace, it has to be premised on the absence of violence. We know that if there is to be peace, there has to be compromise. We know that if there is to be peace, then one side cannot win absolutely. And in this context, you cannot have a two-state solution to this problem without a state of Palestine. But you cannot have a two-state solution either without the state of Israel. This has been an awful catastrophe to watch. From October 7th onwards, each day has brought forward new and fresh horror. The scale of the loss of life is simply horrific. It is emotionally gut-wrenching. It is anger-inducing. The decision of the Irish state, along with those of European friends in Spain and in Norway, to join with many other countries in recognising the state of Palestine, it is an important one. It is symbolic, but in and of itself, it will not save a single Palestinian life. Only Israel can do that. And we understand that Israel itself feels under siege. We understand too that for historical reasons, Israel has an understandable sensitivity to its place in the world. And we know that Israel finds it hard to understand that when we in Ireland look at this problem, that we see primarily not Israeli and Gazans, but David and Goliath. What has taken place in recent months has added to Israel's insecurity. You cannot eliminate Hamas by perpetuating the grievance that sustains its existence. To begin to put in place an end to this tragedy and this conflict, we need a peace process. The career of a single politician cannot be allowed to impede this necessity. President Joe Biden, in many ways, has had a remarkable presidency, but on this issue, the conflict in and over Gaza, the United States and President Biden have not had the courage of their convictions. President Biden knows that there is no long-term security for Israel that does not cater for the national aspiration of the Palestinians. You cannot say that you advocate a two-state solution by word if those words are not matched by deeds. You cannot and should not protect an Israeli state that is not open to a genuine attempt to relaunch the peace process. You cannot do good while ignoring or cajoling a bad faith actor, because we know that whilst tragedy unfolds on a daily basis in Gaza, the geographical basis for the two-state solution is being undermined by extremist settlers in the West Bank. And in the face of sheer horror of the last few months, there is only one legitimate response by the international community: try again, try harder, try seriously. So I say to you, President Biden, from these houses, discreet phone calls to try and rein in Netanyahu isn't global leadership. Your current approach is prolonging this tragedy, not shortening it. The evidence shows that your strategy is contributing to the loss of life in Gaza and elsewhere. And to you and to incoming UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, I say this: you know Ireland well. You know our peace process too well to think that you have one going on in Israel and Palestine. And you've got to do better than that. Others stand to help in good faith, but you have to lead. and a Labour Prime Minister in the UK must also lead. Without a peace initiative involving the United States, UK and the EU, we will witness the continuing brutalisation, impoverishment and radicalisation of the Gazan people. And I fear we will have to witness more of the horrific scenes from Rafah that shook everyone to the core this weekend. This war on the people of Gaza will not bring security to Israel. It will only create another generation brutalised by war, orphaned by war, and intent on revenge. The longer Israel continues its action in Gaza, the further we get from peace. Since mid-October, we have witnessed the entire population of Gaza herded from pillar to post, increasingly desperate for food, shelter and medical aid. Aid has become a negotiating card, not a humanitarian priority. And the basic infrastructure of a functioning society, hospitals, schools, playgrounds, has been systematically razed to the ground. This is the intentional destruction of the Gazan people and their society, an attempt to bomb them into hand-to-mouth existence. It is collective punishment of an entire people for the crimes of Hamas. It is genocide. It is a moral outrage, and Israel has to stop. Last week, we joined with our EU partner, Spain, and our European partner, Norway, in recognising the state of Palestine. We also know that other European states, such as Portugal and Slovenia, for instance, are in favour of recognition in principle and are seeking a broader EU consensus before making further moves. This only serves yet again to underscore how dangerous and arrogant Ursula von der Leyen's actions last autumn were. She does not represent the people of Ireland or the millions of Europeans who have marched to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. She does not represent the people of Ireland. Her credibility amongst people across the European Union is at zero. And at the time of her visit to Israel last autumn, we knew we were on the brink of a disproportionate Israeli military response engendering a humanitarian crisis on an unprecedented scale. In short, we knew that thousands of Gazans would be killed and injured by the Israeli military, yet she said she stood with Israel. Her unilateral decision to give a blank cheque to the Netanyahu government was reckless, senseless and immoral. Ursula von der Leyen has lost all moral authority. She cannot lead the European Commission for another term. So in conclusion, I'll ask Concordia, last week was a proud day for Ireland. I would like to pay tribute to those in campaign groups across Ireland who have kept the flame of peace alive over the decades and who have highlighted the plight of the Gazan people. However, our work in this House and beyond cannot stop at symbols. As I mentioned earlier, there are practical steps that Ireland and the EU can take to put pressure on Israel for a ceasefire. And most importantly, we have to use our influence to lay the foundations for a real peace process. A peace process that delivers dignity to the Palestinian people and security to the people of Israel. We know it is possible. We know the first step is ceasefire, and that ceasefire has to happen now. And we should lead in demanding an international boycott of the Israeli state on all fronts, on all levels, until that ceasefire begins and steps through a process of peace begins. To Palestinians in Ireland and across the world, your existence is your resistance, and we recognise it here today.
It's a very significant and important day when a state formally recognises another. And it didn't really hit home for me today how significant this was until I saw the Palestinian national flag flying on my way into Leinster House. When my party was negotiating more than 4 years ago for a commitment to recognise the state of Palestine in the programme for government, we never thought it would be under such circumstances. Nevertheless, this formal expression of solidarity is hugely significant. I know from my own time working in Palestine that the Palestinian people look internationally for support in a variety of ways. And this act of recognising the state of Palestine will have a real impact on the hopes that Palestinians have for peace and for justice. Since I've been in office, I've endeavoured to use my role whenever possible to support the protection of human rights in Palestine. When Palestinian human rights organisations were blacklisted by the IDF, I visited the West Bank and met with them and publicly declared support for their mission. I've met with the ICJ, I've met with the ICC, and I've met with UNRWA in Brussels and Geneva, and again publicly supported their mission. And I'm proud that Ireland was first out in their defence. At the time, I wrote to ambassadors of all the countries that paused UNRWA funding, and many have reversed that decision, and I urge the remaining countries to follow suit. This movement against UNRWA was and is symptomatic of a bigger issue. There is a war in Gaza, but there is another war operating in parallel and now escalating. And that is the war being waged on human rights, international humanitarian law, but also, and in particular, against the institutions that endeavour to protect and uphold them. The International Court of Justice is one of those institutions. It's one of the 6 organs of the United Nations. Its decisions are binding. And let's just recap on some of the orders over the last 5 months that the ICJ has made. Initially, in January, the ICJ announced that Israel must take all measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide. In March, one of the orders to take all necessary measures to ensure humanitarian aid is accessible, including increasing capacity and number of land crossing points. And just recently, last week, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah Governorate. We all know how Israel has viewed these orders. People not familiar with the history of the illegal occupation of Palestine might not be aware of the decades of impunity that Israel has built this war on. And it is this impunity that must change if we are to expect a different outcome to the long-standing conflict. There must be consequences. It's important to recap that in February, former Taoiseach Varadkar and the Spanish Prime Minister wrote to President von der Leyen to request a review of the human rights clause in the EU-Israel Association Agreement. And frankly, what has followed has been a level of disregard for international agreements and human rights that has not just been hugely damaging to the Palestinian people, but also damages the credibility of the Commission and other international institutions. If the EU does not at least temporarily suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement, it is de facto supporting the growing disregard for international agreements, international law, the ICJ, the UN and the ICC, which have all been under attack of late. It is vital that we defend and protect the international institutions that endeavour to maintain a basic moral and legal order internationally. Their legitimacy is under attack, and we should be very worried about this, not just in the context of Israel's actions in Gaza, but going forward. Other international actors are watching closely to see how far Israel can go without major consequence and to see how much these vital international institutions are undermined. I want to acknowledge the role that civil society has played in Palestine in keeping hope alive among everyday Palestinians. I also want to acknowledge the role civil society in Ireland has played in pushing for justice, in pushing for true respect for human rights, and in organising extraordinary experiences and expressions of solidarity. In particular, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary event that Bohemians Football Club organised recently with the Palestinian national women's team. And anyone there on the night will absolutely understand and respect and acknowledge that expressions of solidarity do have a very real impact on people and their hopes as well. A vibrant and a varied civil society plays an important role in expressing public opinion in an open democracy. And I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Students' Union in Trinity College in what they have achieved. Civil society plays an important role in sparking change, and I feel there is more potential for civil society to spark change with cross-societal agreements with unions and with businesses. I think we can go further in nationally expressing our respect for human rights and our abhorrence for what has been inflicted on the people of Gaza.
Minister Emer Higgins.
last time.
Please. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to suspend. Want to suspend? The Dáil is suspended. Members in the gallery, I understand the strength of feeling and I understand the significance of today, but if we could please, your cooperation really as we continue, and we'll show respect for the speakers regardless of which side of the House they're on. Okay. Minister Emer Higgins.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. Since 2020, when I was first elected, time and time again I've risen to my feet in support of the fundamental rights for Palestinians. Today, we raise the Palestinian flag above Dáil Éireann. Today, we signalled our support for a two-state solution. Today, we are proud to be Irish. It's a momentous, significant and historic day, And Spain and Norway join us in our recognition of the state of Palestine, and we hope and we encourage more countries to do the same. Because how can we ever get to a two-state solution without recognising Palestine as a state? Lasceann Comhairle, every time I've risen to my feet here to discuss Palestine, the death toll there has increased. The destruction of Palestine has increased. The carnage in Palestine has increased. And so too has the propaganda from the Israeli government. The Hamas attack on October 7th is something I absolutely condemn. And the 1,000 Israeli lives who have been lost since then should not have been lost. But those awful figures, which represent real people and real families, stand in stark contrast to the 35,000 Palestinians in Gaza who have died since then. And over 15,000 of them were children. 10,000 more are missing. That is completely disproportionate. The Israeli Defence Forces, known for its military precision, it's them that are targeting babies and hospitals. The Israeli force fences